Nokia upgrades the internet. Veeam fried their forums. SanDisk is now powering up petabyte disks. SonicWall has some SSL issues. OpenSSH has a little bit of a bug. And we're going to take a look at some of the rumors about maybe Broadcom buying Intel's chip design facilities in this episode of the Gestalt IT Rundown. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Gestalt IT Rundown. It is Wednesday, February the 19th. My name is Tom Hollingsworth, and I am back from Amsterdam to host this episode of the Rundown. And I hope that you all had something fun for dessert at lunch today, possibly something that had, mint and chocolate in it, because, well, it's Chocolate Mint Day. And as I will remind everybody out there, the proper serving size for Girl Scout Thin Mint cookies is, in fact, one sleeve or half a box. Joining me, though, is someone who is one of my favorite hosts and one of my favorite people in the tech industry, the CTO advisor himself, Mr. Keith Townsend. Keith, big fan of the Thin Mint Girl Scout cookies?
You know what? I just had the mimosa. What is it? It's not a mimosa, Samoa. And I just finished my last sleeve of the Samoa last night. We only bought one box this year. So, and I finished off that box last night.
Well, I'm glad that you were able to finish it off, and maybe you finish it off with a nice mimosa. Who knows? That's totally allowed. But I know it goes great with mimosas, samosas, and all the other osas out there, and that would be the news of the week. It's been a fairly busy week, even though in the U.S. we had a holiday on Monday. There's been a lot going on from late last week to this week, and we wanted to jump in with some of the hot news. And we're going to start off with a fun story from our friends over at Nokia, because New York's DECIX is about to get a whole lot faster. The Internet Exchange has selected Nokia to be their preferred partner to upgrade their backbone to 400 gigabit Ethernet and eventually to 800 gigabit Ethernet. They do have something they call the reconfigurable optical add-drop module, which of course says ROADM if you are putting it out there as an acronym. And that's going to allow this Internet Exchange to take advantage of faster speeds down the road, going from 400 to 800 and possibly even beyond. Now, one thing to note about the DECIX is that they are actually the fifth largest internet exchange in the United States, and they power more than just New York. They actually power a huge chunk of New England, and they've been a Nokia customer for the last 10 years. Now, Keith, I know you've had a lot of experience working on some Nokia gear in the past, and I want to let you kind of have an opportunity to talk about why you think Nokia is uniquely positioned to take advantage of opportunities, especially in the carrier space.
Yeah, so it's not just the carrier space. I find this news interesting in two ways. One, 800 gigabits is crazy amount of bandwidth, but we are talking about the New York City backbone, so it's an appropriate future-proofing of connectivity as we look at more fiber to the home, fiber to the business. Like 1 gigabit seems to be the standard. And Nokia is well known in the carrier networks, from their radio RAN businesses to down to, again, this push into the not just carrier network from an IP perspective, but carrier networks from a cloud provider and data center perspective. Nokia announced, I think it's going to 3 or 4 weeks ago now, that they have a strategic investment of about $50 million a year that changed their revenue mix from 90% carrier for their IP services, like the deal that's just announced, to 50-50 mix of enterprise customers, cloud provider customers, and carrier. This is a $50 million per year investment over the next 5 years. Nokia has visited Tech Field Day in the form of a Tech Field Day X, and they talked about their network management tool that allows you to configure networks in this abstracted way that all the enterprise IT vendors are going for. So Nokia is making moves, and this announcement, I think, will help with their street cred in getting network administrators and system administrators' attention and buyers' attention on trying to penetrate this new market. If you posted on Veeam forums last week, you'd be wondering why it disappeared. It wasn't just you. The company acknowledged that they had some forum issues for about 24 hours where topics and comments were gone. The root cause? A backup of the forum database was restored by a internal team, even though there was no reason for the restore. I guess they were just testing it. Veeam quickly admitted to the mistake, the cause, and more importantly, admitted this all without prompting or trolling.
I love the fact that Veeam just decided to freely admit what they did, because this is something that I feel like so many people miss so many times in all of the errors that come up, right? Um, let's be fair. We've all done this, right? We went out and we said something blew up, so we restored from backup, and it turned out we actually restored back too far. Like, I had to do it with my kid's iPad a couple of days ago. It ran out of storage space, so I had to completely erase it. And I'm like, boy, I hope you have a good backup. And he did. His backup was just a couple of days old. But for an enterprise tech company that lives by their support forums to say, yeah, we did this. And the other thing, too, is that they admitted that they did it and didn't need to. That's another huge step for companies, because usually they'll say, oh, well, there was this undisclosed error that we needed to patch up. No, they flat out said somebody in the operations team just restored the database when they know they didn't have to. And I think that's commendable. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this. I would rather have a company admit mea culpa. We did something we weren't supposed to, and we fixed it. We're sorry that, some of your forum threads got lost. Thankfully, if it's only 24, 48 hours worth of threads, then those can probably be reconstituted, or if they weren't important, then who cares? But more importantly, for a company to be willing to say, this is what you deal with when you have these kinds of deployment methodologies, right? Like continuous deployment, continuous improvement. It forces you to look at what would normally have been like a groundbreaking error and say, okay, this is just stuff that happens, and it's time to get okay with this. Now, it's not okay that Veeam didn't have a way of snapshotting the forums, because we know that Veeam has all of these capabilities built into their data protection platform, and they'll be talking about it at Security Field Day later this year in May. But I think it's critical for them to understand that customers need to expect more out of this. And even if it's just a database software that they don't use, it's not Veeam. Veeam doesn't make databases. They make backup and disaster recovery and data protection appliances. They still have to be willing to show people that they can recover from these errors. So, bravo to Veeam for just kind of throwing their hand up and being like, guess what? We messed up, but we're fine now. Everything's fine. At a recent SanDisk Investor Day, the drive manufacturer touted their Ultra QLC technology and how it will enable solid-state drives to get up to 1 petabyte of storage. The challenge for these drives is to be able to get the right amount of performance out of the ever-growing size of NAND that's in the enclosure. SanDisk thinks that they've solved this problem with a new wider memory channel and some proprietary controller elements, but the chips that they need to get in order to make these drives grow to that particular size aren't quite available yet. Keith, I do have a question, though, based on some comments that I've seen. Are enterprise customers going to trust all of their data to one single giant drive?
Yeah, so a little history, the SanDisk, Micron, Solidigm, who's been at Field Days a lot, have been on this chase for bigger and bigger SSDs. They've now outpaced the HDD market. I think the largest HDD is around 27 to 30 terabytes, a mere 30 terabytes. They've gone from 64 to 128 to now 250, roughly 250 terabyte drives. And none of these companies can keep these drives in stock. They can sell as many as they can make. And what's driving this? Oh, the AI boogeyman. Basically, if you're training large data sets, if you need large data sets, AI is driving the thirst for these large drives. And then remember, there's still other use cases like genomics data, academic research, where you're collecting data that doesn't need to be backed up, frankly, that you need the log data. The challenge for a lot of these customers is this concept of ultra QLC is not the density, not just the density as chips, but Tom, you might know a little bit something about this. You need to be able to get that data to the CPU and processor pretty quickly in that reliance on being able to network these, put these into storage arrays, and be able to utilize these data sets and get them to the GPUs and CPUs. That's the real challenge. SonicWall has a new CVE, not an old one, that is targeting SSL VPN authentication. The attackers can exploit a bypass to hijack SSL VPN sessions and gain access to unauthorized devices on the network. The proof of concept exploit has already been spotted in the wild by Arctic Wolf. The exploit was initially found back in January, and SonicWall has been working to deploy a patch. As of last week, about 4,000 devices still needed to be upgraded to mitigate the threat. SonicWall stated that there are currently no active reports of exploitation of the vulnerability. Tom, is it time to patch again?
There's always time to patch. I swear, I put more patches on my devices than I ever did on my blue jeans when I was growing up. The thing here is that we've known about this for a couple of weeks, or at least somebody has known about this for a couple of weeks because they discovered it in late January. I do not like the idea of hijacking SSL VPN sessions because it feels like so many people use SSL VPN on a daily basis. I mean, I've taken briefings from some companies recently that are looking to tighten the screws on some of the SSL VPN things. Like, if you log in, you don't have access to do lateral movement across systems inside the network. You're like limited to a certain application set, which I think is an admirable thing. But when you think about the number of people who are working quote unquote remotely or, that are in a hybrid situation, they're going to just drop an SSL VPN and go and think about all the non-state actors, all of the criminal organizations that are knocking at the door that would love to gain a foothold into your organization. Oh, you just happen to be running one of these vulnerable versions of SonicWall firewalls with the non-patched OS. Perfect. And I think we get back into that whole little dance of, is it exploitable? Is it being exploited? Is it being actively exploited? Because, I mean, once you know that the code is vulnerable, then you have to wait for somebody to create a proof of concept, because otherwise it's just a bug. And then once you see a proof of concept, you have to wait until people are actually using it in the wild. And then SonicWall coming out and saying, well, nobody is being actively exploited. Well, what determines an active exploit? Do they have to open a ticket? Does the ticket have to be determined to be this particular CVE that's being exploited? It's the word game, right? It's like, there are absolutely no people here that I know of that have this problem because I choose not to know about them having this problem, kind of thing. So the answer there, of course, is patch your stuff. Just declare a maintenance window this weekend if you haven't already. If you're one of those 4,000 plus people who still don't have their devices patched, get it updated so that there's not a chance. Because as we've learned over the years, you may think that you're immune from this, and you will be up until the day you're not. So don't assume that you're just going to fly by and no one's going to be able to figure this out. Get it patched, deal with the fallout of having your firewall go down for an hour. I don't think anybody's really going to give you any hard time about this. HPE is getting on the Granite Rapids train with a new release of their next generation Gen 12 servers. One of them is a 1U HPE ProLiant DL320, and it's got one of those spanking new Intel Xeon 6 processors in it with 144 cores. You're probably thinking to yourself, how am I going to cool this monstrosity? Well, you can go with good old-fashioned air, or you can use water cooling, which is a new option that HPE is offering. You can also upgrade to the DL340, which is a 2U, or all the way to the DL380, which will take up a spanking several RUs, but give you a lot of processor capabilities. And of course, there are some questions about whether or not these servers are going to ship with Granite Rapids chips, or if they're going to be Granite Rapids capable in the future. Keith, you are someone who is very well versed in all of these areas of compute. What's exciting to you about these new Gen 12 servers?
Well, what's exciting is that if we remember back in the Gen 9, Gen 10, Gen 10 Plus, HPE announced that specifically for, I'm going to say a bad word in the Intel world, for their persistent memory solution. to be able to expand your DRAM slots with basically SSDs on DRAM, if everyone remembers that. Then then HPE's Gen 11 and now Gen 12 are starting to change, or obvious trend changes. These two systems or generations are not following the Intel roadmap exactly. We're talking about air cooling. Do you need to air cool any CPU? I mean, do you need to? We're starting to talk about water cooling. I'm sorry. Do you need to water cool any modern CPU? Not really. It's a nice to have liquid cooling for CPUs, but liquid cooling is for GPUs. And now these systems are starting to follow the TikTok of NVIDIA. The making sure the marrying post of this is that HPE announced their first NVIDIA Blackwell system because GPUs are now dictating all of the refresh cycle from not just Dell, HPE, and Lenovo, but the entire server market. So, we're starting to see a continued demise of Intel x86 as the master of all things distributed systems in our data center. I guess we need more than one person managing OpenSSH. Bugs aren't just things that appear in big places. Research firm Qualys found new vulnerabilities in OpenSSH that need to be patched. The bugs allow for attackers to inject themselves into an exchange when a specific DNS verification setting is enabled. For about 10 years, it was not enabled by default. This particular bug was introduced in 2014. There's also another bug that could cause a denial of service for a client because of resource exhaustion. OpenSSH is a package that is used on almost every computer in the world for a variety of tasks. Tom, 10 years is a lot of time to have an exploit out like that out there.
Yeah, it is. And when I saw this report, my first thought was, how did you guys miss this? But then I think it requires a different level of attack, I guess would be the best way to put it. So yes, there's a setting that was, it talked about using like DNS keys and things like that. And of course, one of the things that we do in software is we try to make it easy for the users, right? So this thing was enabled by default. In 2013, actually, I think is when it was disabled or enabled by default. It is now disabled by default because someone finally woke up and said, yeah, maybe having this thing turned on is not good. The problem is that if you're running one of these vulnerable versions of OpenSSH, someone could connect to that and do a little spoof, and then they can get access to the system. That's bad enough. The funny thing, though, is that if you look at the CVE scores, it's actually not like, it's not a 9. It's not even an 8. I think one of them's like a 6. So it's one of those things where it's like, okay, now that you got access to OpenSSH, now what are you going to do? The other one is actually kind of more of annoying than it is like earth-shattering. It's like I can cause like a weird kind of race condition where I like exhaust the resources on a target server or on a target client through like almost like a denial of service attack. The problem is not so much that it's a life-altering bug in the platform. It's that the platform is used everywhere. I can't think of an operating system that doesn't use OpenSSH in some form or another. I can't think of a server that doesn't. I mean, okay, let's be fair. If you're running Mac OS or Linux, you're using OpenSSH all the time. If you're running Windows servers, there's a good chance you're using components of OpenSSH because companies like Microsoft and Fortinet and Apple, they don't go out and rebuild the wheel every time that they need SSH access. They just pull down OpenSSH because it's free, make sure that it's updated to the latest versions, and they install that with the operating system. So part of me really wants to say, how did you let this bug be there for 10 years and not know anything about it? By the way, in case you were wondering, the resource exhaustion bug only showed up in 2023. So it's only at most, a year and change old now. I think it's more along the lines of we're starting to look at the things that people are attacking. So people are not going after like just the firewall itself. They're not just going after the server itself. They're going after the individual components inside of the server. They're looking for those vulnerabilities in the armor, as it were. so that they can kind of, get through the protections and then start their usual escapades of lateral movement and everything like that. So again, if you're patching other things this weekend, you might as well go make sure that you've patched OpenSSH as well. You never know what might happen. Okay, we had a story we wanted to take a closer look at. This one could be interesting, though. There's some rumors flying out there. This one, of course, comes from the Wall Street Journal, and there's a report that claims that Broadcom is investigating Intel's chip design business, and they're contemplating an acquisition. It says that while Broadcom is interested in chip design, they are very not interested in the foundry business. Now, some of the analysts that are commenting on this are intrigued because that means there's really two roads for Broadcom at this point. They could be taking some of Intel's chip designs to add to their existing product lineup, and maybe they're going to make some more money off of it. Or they could do the venture capital thing where they package the businesses up for sale to other partners and maybe even some competitors, and they just sell it off and make as much money as they can. Now, here's the $64,000 question. No, it's probably more than that by now, Keith. Do you think that Broadcom really is going to take out a loan and maybe buy part of Intel?
Yeah, so our CEO, Dan Newman, did some analysis on this, but I like to, kind of give some scale of just how much trouble the foundry business is in. Intel has some $22 billion cash on hand and access to $13 billion in credit that they have not used, a line of credit that they have not used. How quickly can they eat through that is the question. The foundry business, or Intel, loses $4 billion a year right now. That's a substantial amount of money. The chip design and the chip business, Xeon that we just talked about, Xeon 6, all of that is still really good business. Intel makes a really good, solid product that makes money. Yes, they've lost some traction to AMD, ARM, and of course, NVIDIA, but they still have really good market share. The question is, would Hock Tan make a profit off a company that has gotten stale, aka VMware? Well, it's Hock Tan.
Here's where I'm curious. I get that having a design division is great. Like these are the wonderkins that are coming up with all these cool new CPUs and things like that. And Lord knows we've seen enough of that development on the ARM side of the house, right? You've got Apple's M-series processors, you've got RISC-V, you've got all of that other stuff. But there's an underlying assumption that I think people need to be very aware of before this rumor goes any further than it does. When you work for Intel and Intel's design facility, you are working with a known quantity of foundry equipment. And you know what the foundry equipment's capabilities are, and that informs your design decisions. And, to me, it would be like living on a farm and buying a vehicle that doesn't have like off-road tire capability. Like, why would you buy like a low-profile sports car if you lived on a farm? Your purchases, your designs are informed by your capabilities, right? And I think that you would have a hard time designing Intel chips to be manufactured with, TSMC, because they're kind of designed to be built in Intel foundries. And likewise, I know that this is one of the things that Pat was trying to do when he had control of the company, was he was trying to make sure that Intel's foundry system could build out chips for other companies. But I also think that the goal initially, no matter what, was going to be for Intel foundries to make Intel chips. And look, I know that Intel foundries are losing money right now. I'm going to shock people out there who don't have a business degree. Manufacturing loses money initially. You have to get your line set up. You have to get your equipment configured correctly. You have to do production runs. Lines don't make money when they start. They make money right before they end, because the millionth chip that comes off the line is taking advantage of 999,000 more chips where they've solved all the problems, where they've created the repeatable processes. So that 1 millionth chip is way more profitable than your first one. but you have to get to the point where you make 1 million chips. And I think this idea that Intel needs to get rid of their foundries or sell them off or get rid of them because they're not making money belies the fact that they will. And yeah, great, you're getting a liability off of your balance sheet, and you're not losing money. You're also not going to be making money on that back end from your investment. And I know that most of the people on Wall Street haven't forgotten that you have to invest money to make money. I mean, I hope that I'm right.
Tom, I hope that you're right too. The world needs Intel. The world needs competition. More competition is better for the enterprise IT consumer.
It is. But you know what the best thing of all is, Keith? Tech Field Day.
Oh,
It is the best thing. I mean, I'm a little bit biased. You're a little bit biased because that's what we do when we're not hosting the rundown. But the good news is that there's Tech Field Day right now, because we're having Cloud Field Day 22 taking place in Silicon Valley. That's where Steven and Al and a bunch of other great delegates are. They got presentations today, February the 19th, tomorrow, February the 20th. Make sure you head over to techfieldday.com, tune in for that. I will be back in Silicon Valley about a month from now, actually. We're going to be doing our next networking field day. We got presentations queued up for the 19th and 20th of March. I know that NVIDIA GTC is going on, but you know me. I had to have the spotlight all to myself at Tech Field Day. Following up in April, we're going to be having an awesome event, AI Infrastructure Field Day. You may remember this from last year's AI Data Infrastructure Field Day, but we wanted to let some of the networking companies and other manufacturers get involved with that. If you want to see a little bit more of the great things that Alistair has lined up for this, make sure you head over to techfieldday.com. You can see the schedule for all the events that we have going on through the first half of the year. There may be some additions to that. You should stay tuned because we're always talking to great companies that are wanting to do special things. And speaking of which, Keith, if people want to check out some of the stuff that you do, where's the best place for them to go to learn that?
Oh man, the best place still remains thectoadvisor.com/blogs. That's where I get my extended thoughts out, where the overlords over at the Futurum Group have not quite figured out that I still sneak in my unfiltered thoughts to you.
Well, I promise that I'm not going to tell anybody, because this is where I get to sneak in some of my unfiltered thoughts every Wednesday when we publish the rundown episodes. They come out around 12:30, lunchtime when you have a little bit of time to yourself. And remember that you can check us out on all kinds of places. You can check out our YouTube channel, youtube.com/GestaltIT video. Check out the website for the show notes and the linked articles. Check out our podcast if you are more of the listening variety. Maybe you want to listen to us while you're rowing or biking or running or whatever it is you do to stay in shape, or maybe you just want to listen to us on the couch, whatever. I'm not going to judge, but what I will judge is the bevy of news that I know we're going to have next week as people are rounding out February. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but we're already more than half over. But we've got more great things that are coming ahead. We've got more great news that we can't wait to bring you. So for myself, for Keith, and for all the rest of the great Rundown co-hosts, thank you so very much for tuning in. We look forward to bringing you more great news next week.